So at 3:35 p.m. on Tuesday, May 19th, we will call to order this policy meeting. Commissioner McFadden and I are here. Commissioner Brooks is going to be joining us when he finishes another commitment, and hopefully Commissioner Lynn will be joining us as well. So our agenda item today is to talk and dig into the recovery plan a bit. So we will start with that. It looks like Dr. Wu is presenting.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everybody. We wanted to provide an opportunity for our board members to share some of their brainstorming and thinking around considerations that we need to keep in mind as we move forward with our education recovery planning. We're doing this in each of the board committee meetings to solicit feedback from our board members as we continue this process. Joe, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So this is a very high-level overview of our timeline. Feels like it's been a long time, but it was about 2 months ago, that a little over 2 months ago, that it was announced that school buildings would be closed. In that time, we very quickly stood up the most immediate need, which was emergency meal sites, and started distributing academic packets. And as we were doing that, we were simultaneously starting to think about long-term planning for remote learning and distance learning, and distributing devices in order for that to happen. We then, launched distance learning and started distributing Chromebooks, and have also been working on connectivity and internet for our students. And as we've been doing that, we have also started, over the course of the last few weeks, starting to really think about our education recovery planning and what school and education is going to look like here in Baltimore as restrictions lift, and as we are able to, in some way, get back to any sort of in-person instruction at our school sites. So this is just a very high-level overview of kind of where we've come so far. So as we have embarked on the education recovery planning work, we have really been working to plug into a lot of conversations that have been happening around the country, as well as even internationally, about what this could look like. Different members on our different teams on staff have been interacting with counterparts in other school districts. We have been engaging in webinars and discussions with a lot of different organizations around how different people are thinking about what this recovery planning is going to look like. So we're really trying to draw upon kind of the thinking of a lot of different people around the country and also internationally on how we approach this work. And so as we kick this off, we really wanted to think about our recovery planning around 4 key components that are on this slide. And so the first one is maintaining health and safety for everyone. Obviously, given the reason we're in this situation, we wanted to make sure that as we think about reentry and kind of recovery and going back to school partially in person, that we are addressing any of the health considerations and guidance that's coming out from our healthcare experts, whether it's around social distancing, around PPE, safety in terms of how close people can be to each other when we are in buildings, and just health and safety first for everybody, students, staff, parents, and partners. So that is a very foundational piece and component of the recovery work, is making sure we are always looking at that as the basis of everything that we plan and do. The second really key component of the recovery planning is around accelerating student learning and thriving. We know during this time, as much as we have really tried to stand up the packets and the distance learning for families, we know that that is uneven across our system and for our students. And we know that there is going to be acceleration that's going to need to happen for students based on their experiences over the last few months. And so we want to make sure that we are really thinking through how we do that. Again, learning from other school districts, learning from the research that's already out there around learning loss. And, people are now referring it to as the COVID slide, similar to what was referred to previously as summer slide, and taking all of that into account as we think about what instruction is going to look like for students once we are back in person. The third key component is making sure we're supporting all stakeholders in adapting to this new reality, and that is for students, teachers, staff, families, partners. This is new for everybody. There is a lot of change and a lot of adjustment, and we want to make sure that in everything that we do and we roll out that is new and different, that we are supporting people through that change. That may come in the form of very technical kinds of things around, professional development on how to use platforms or how to access something online, to very adaptive things, right, around how do we make sure that we are accounting for student wellness and staff wellness during this process, because this is a very challenging experience for a lot of people, and people are juggling a lot of different things in their personal and professional lives. And so we want to make sure that we are thinking about that as we do the recovery planning work. And then the fourth component is around ensuring that our operations folks are really buttressing these other areas, right? Making sure that we are thinking about the financial implications of the things that we're doing, the legal implications of the things that we're doing, making sure things like transportation and IT are supporting our approach and a part of the planning for all of these different components. So these are kind of the four key components of our planning. The other kind of key framework as we embark on this work is around what we're calling the three-phase framework. And so we know this situation is fluid and remains and will continue to be fluid. And so we are really asking our folks to think about this planning work based on three different phases. So phase one is the kind of phase we are currently in, where learning is fully remote. Our school buildings are closed and all learning is happening through distance learning, and there's no in-person learning. Then at some point, we will likely shift to phase two, which we are terming the hybrid model. This is kind of medium-term phase where there is going to be a combination of potentially in-person and distance learning that's happening, but we will have to be taking into consideration the social distancing and kind of health guidelines that are coming from both, the local and national sources. So it will be a combination that takes into account all of those things. And then phase three, which we're terming as the new normal, and that's really longer term planning. So this is where basically we are back to kind of in-person, in-school building learning. But the caveat here is that there are some virtual components which are based on this third bullet point, which is around really being able to incorporate the lessons we've learned through phase one and two, and thinking about how we can innovatively use distance learning as a part of our longer term education strategy, right? I'm sure folks have heard different stories and instances where students who maybe were not thriving in the current way that we did school previously are really thriving in a distance learning capacity. And so we're thinking about how to leverage that, or ways in which we have really rock star teachers in particular schools, and how can we expand the reach of those teachers beyond the students in their particular school building going forward. So phase three is kind of the innovative new normal that we are planning for. The reason it's important to plan for all three of these phases is we know, given the fluidity of this situation, that it's possible that we could shift into a hybrid or even the new normal. And given, depending on how the virus acts, it's possible we'll have to shift back, right, to a hybrid version or even to a fully remote learning kind of phase. And so we want to make sure that as we're planning for what education would look like in any one of these three phases. And so we really wanted to, given this framing, as I mentioned, we are having this conversation with each of the three board committees around, particularly from that committee's perspective, what are some of the things that we should be keeping in mind as we do this planning. And so for this committee, the policy committee, from a policy perspective, in looking at those four key components in the three-phase framework, is there anything that you see that we're missing or other things we need to take into consideration? And then a very specific question for this committee, and I know Commissioner James Hassan has already started thinking about this. What policies do you anticipate may need to be reexamined during this process, and both the planning and the implementation period? And are there ways we can change the policy review process to account for that? And then other general questions from a policy perspective of what key things are important that we have to have in place for folks when we reopen? What are things that you've seen or learned from what's happening currently that we should be using to inform how we approach phases 2 and 3, and how can we leverage that for going forward? Any challenges that you want us to be aware of, and then what are ways that we can share with you, our progress and success as we go through this process. So really wanted to provide an opportunity for the board to share your thinking with us, and brainstorming on some of these key issues as we move forward with the planning process. I am going to put myself on mute so that I can take notes so that you don't hear the clacking of my keyboard. But obviously, I'm happy to circle back to respond to any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that very, very much. Commissioner McFadden, would you like to jump in first and share thoughts, ideas, reflections?
No, I'm processing. Thank you, Dr. Wu, also for your work on this. But I'm going to let you take the lead, Dr. James.
Okay, welcome, Dr. Brooks. Glad you are here with us. I don't know when you jumped in, but
Hold on, Dr. James. I just want to say how smart and how great I feel that I am on a call with all of you wonderful doctors. I just wanted to say that.
So do we call you PD, as in pre-doctor?
No, I'm responding.
Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can. So I don't know. I apologize, Dr. Brooks. I didn't realize when you joined. So do you need any recap of Jenny's presentation?
No, I already looked at it beforehand.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Would you like to go first? Because I don't want to monopolize with ideas, concerns, red flags, white flags, green flags, blue flags.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So my camera is so weird; it's angled and I can't get it right. But whatever. So one of the things that came up for me, actually, before I start, Dr. Wu, if you could give me a little bit more framing around sort of the intention of our session today, that would be helpful, and then I can give my thoughts and some of the areas based on the presentation that I read.
Sure. So we are working on very heavily starting to think about what this recovery planning process is going to entail, and we've got a lot of different work streams and work groups that are going to be kicking off planning for these different phases, right? Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, taking into consideration those 4 key components that are on the slide. And so as we embark on that planning with staff, and we have also made sure that in those different work stream groups that we have incorporated principals, teachers, and potentially students in the work streams, that it makes sense that we get different perspectives that we need to make sure are included in the planning process. And so as we kind of really start to embark on that road, we wanted to make sure that our board members had an opportunity to provide us with any of their thinking or feedback on our approach, kind of the way the 4 components, the 3 phases, any particular things that you are seeing right now in terms of hearing from the community and folks who are, going through phase 1 right now. Anything we can learn from that would inform us as we do this planning work. And so we really just wanted to provide an opportunity for board members to do that.
Sweet. So thank you so much. That's really helpful. And I guess one of the things that came to mind as I was reviewing the presentation was really around SEL and trying to figure out specifically, because basically what I saw was a framework, right? So we have these big bucket areas, and so there were no details inside, really. It's just a kind of general approach to the work. And so I don't know how much of this is going to be grainy and in like sort of that space, but sort of a way in which we can sort of pull that out and sort of lift that up. Because I think right now, given the context of COVID-19, the health and wellness of our students, I think, is important. So whether that was in I think the first box was around the physical, maybe physical measures, but maybe around the social, adding that social emotional piece in there would be really important. But I have a particular sort of a thought. And so not only for the students, what I really want to see, and maybe you can actually respond to me. Is Allison on the phone, or did she join?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Allison. And so one of the things that I've struggled with the district is that I often don't think we provide enough support for our teachers. And so I would love to hear about sort of what does SEL look like from a context of teachers who are supporting students who are traumatized themselves and then working with those who are traumatized. And for me, I feel like that would be, Allison, a great point in terms of what have we done so far to support teachers, and if there's a vision for around supporting that, their emotional, mental health needs as well as they try to support our students.
So we have provided, we provided supports to teachers both in terms of, lots of professional learning opportunities at the beginning to help them think about how to do this. We've also provided, we've tried to create the wellness approach that we have for teachers to use in the classroom to think about how they approach mindfulness, and we have our wellness schedule for each day of the week where they're thinking about how to incorporate social emotional learning into the workday so they can connect with their students. We've also tried to really emphasize the connections between folks. So we've really tried to encourage opportunities for teachers to connect with, for principals to connect with teachers, and teachers connect with each other in this work, because it's really challenging to think through how to do this differently. And then we do have supports. We have a mental health hotline that is more intended for students. But we also have, continue to provide EAP services for teachers, and try to make sure that's available for teachers as well. I know that we've been trying to, at the staff level, and Jenny's led a lot of this work, try to really provide opportunities for staff too, to be checking in, to really modeling from the highest level and then down through the organization. How do you really check in with your staff and regularly create an environment in which you're checking in with people, just to give them time and space to talk about how this is impacting them, how it's impacting their lives, how they're thinking about from, it's impacting everybody from how they interact with their students to how they're managing the fact that they have students at home, their own family that they're dealing with, and maybe their own health concerns with their family. So creating space in the way that school communities engage with each other to check in on those things as a part of our regular practice. So again, we've tried to start with that at the cabinet level, and then really instill that practice through the various offices, so that and schools, so that people are thinking that as part of the regular way we do the work, because you are right that this has a huge impact on all of us, and how we're all showing up for work each day for our colleagues and for our students.
I can add to that a little bit. We have been really trying, and I know John Davis in his communications to principals that he has every day is always reminding them that they need to be thinking through the wellness of their staff, and thinking about ways to support their staff through this, very challenging time where people are trying to balance a lot of different things. And so at a school by school level, we know there are things that are happening between principals and finding ways to support their staff. In addition to that, we send out fairly regular communications to all staff, and even just yesterday, an email went out to everyone that had work and wellness resources. So to some of the points that you just made around, helping staff wellness. So there are sessions like how to manage your work home space, planning work in uncertain times, learning the importance of self-care and stress management. We're offering virtual yoga, resiliency and mental wellness in the workplace, a session on losing a loved one to COVID-19. So we're really trying to make sure that we have webinars and resources for staff who might be going through different things or need different types of support and resources to support them during this time. So we're doing that currently. And I think one of the things that is incorporated into the slide, as you mentioned, at a very high level, is the component that's around supporting everyone in this changing time. So one of the groups is staff. And so one of the ways that we're going to make sure that we really think through how we are, I mentioned kind of technical kinds of things, right, around making sure people know how to use online platforms and things like that. But that's a very technical kind of support we will be providing. But to your point, we are also making sure that we include wellness kinds of supports, right, for staff going forward. We have been offering them now, and we're going to make sure that we continue that in the recovery time. as parents, students, and staff go back, how do we make sure we're supporting them from a wellness perspective and how they're doing their work, whether it's in a hybrid or back to school kind of way?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing. I also thought of that we are also trying to really think through long term about ways to give breaks to staff too. So we're still working through that, but we're very aware, and I think all of us have heard from many staff people how exhausted they are, that this is really hard. So that's partly why we're also scheduling, and that's why we preserved the June 2nd day to be off for all schools and all central office staff to give people breaks. And then we're trying to look at ways that we could, create breaks in the schedule, looking at things like, afternoons when we could have like specific times when we do wellness activities. And we haven't decided what we're landing on yet, but are there breaks in the day when you can be free of email? We're trying to figure out ways that we just schedule in as part of the regular part of what people do. They're going to get breaks to process what they're going through.
So this is a very, very superficial, but it would be great if we could maybe consider partnering with the city and have, police go through and be like, it's a drop everything and dance moment city, and pop on get all the radio stations play the same song at the same moment. And, like we used to do, drop everything and read, get everybody in some collective experiences.
Yeah. And I think from all of those things sound wonderful. And I'm really glad that the district is doing that. And I kind of, as you were talking about, Allison, around sort of how do we begin to re-envision what work looks like in the moment of COVID-19, I think that there has to be some reimagining, right? And so what those breaks are, sort of like, whereas we could, we knew teachers weren't working 40 hours a week anyway, they were always working more. So like, how do we then sort of design space around them that they can actually structure more free time? But I would also say that even in sort of that restructuring, like when it extends down to pedagogy, right? So like, I know that we were instructing folks to do a few minutes of check-in around SEL with students. I think at this point, because we're in a crisis, that time might need to be expanded. So really thinking it through guidance around sort of like, given the severity of the context, what we were offering in terms of like a good check-in might need to be doubled, and sort of how does that impact the space, the school, the teachers, and so forth. And so, I'd really like to see that through line. So not only through a practice of SEL in terms of sort of building sort of healthier emotional spaces, but always extend it through sort of to the classroom pedagogy. And most importantly, having that information tracked, and so we can actually see if it's effective.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, we've tried to be very intentional about giving lessons to teachers to use, but I think you're right, is like really making sure that they're using the time and filtering it into their regular curriculum, because it's just not a time where you just can do the academic piece. You have to think about how it connects to the social emotional piece.
And hopefully that's a lesson that carries over and think about it afterwards. So the question that I would pose to Commissioner McFadden and Commissioner Brooks is, so let's fast forward. We're in November of 2020, whatever that looks like between now and then, whether it's cyclical on and off, whether we're full on, hybrid, full off. How will you look at our district and measure and say, oh, we did that really well? So in November of 2020, what are the metrics we look at to say we did fall well? And how can we use that then as a back mapping to figure out what policy components we need to be looking at now to support making that happen?
I think a big part of that is around student engagement and the amount of students that we actually have engaging consistently in opportunities learning and co-curricular. I think will give us a lot of data as to, are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing the right thing based on the amount of students that are engaged? I think that's important. And to kind of go back to what Dr. Brooks was mentioning about the professional learning, for teachers, it just has to be more robust and targeted in a relevant way. It's one thing to create online modules. It's one thing to just have the information there. It's another thing to be responsive to the needs of the practitioners that are actually working. And I think that we have to really make sure that we're listening to their feedback consistently, to really understand what their needs are, what their challenges are, what their impediments are, from getting in contact with students and children. While we were just meeting, I had a student that just actually texted me that we weren't able to reach. That's a really high moment. But I think we've got to figure out how do we continue to keep our students engaged, because this is all new. So we can do as much planning as we possibly can, but we have not been prepped to go into a remote, way of living, a way of life. And I think we have to just do as Dr. Brooks was saying, rethink the way that we are doing professional learning. I think that's vital and critical now, because it should look different than it did 3 months ago. Professional learning should look different. So I think one of our benchmarks will be engagement. How do we keep track of students in a relevant way, and their parents in a relevant way? Because I think that will be a clear indication of what we're doing. It's either good or it's not. Thinking about us being in a system of choice, parents, families, students, they tend to go to schools with programs that appeal to them, that they can identify with. And I'm thinking about our choice process and even how that looks as we move forward, and how we're continuing to attract students to our school programs, given the thought of a state recovery plan, which is saying there could be multiple phases of us going back in. We get that, so we're planning for that. But as a result, could we potentially lose students? Could parents actually opt to homeschool their children, as a result of us being remote? So there are a lot of things that I'm thinking through and that I'm processing, but I think one of those big blocks is going to be engagement, and how we prepare to make sure that we are engaging in a way that is relevant.
Mhm.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lesson there for us too in targeting robust, differentiated, and targeted PD. How do we do robust, targeted, and differentiated instruction? So whether we look to project based or we look to different sort of menus of how we do servicing. One thing that I would caution though, and I'm trying to make sure that we're clear for parents and community in the language, is that this wasn't distance learning, this was crisis learning. Like, we should not be evaluated as a system, as individual teachers or as principals or as students by our success in raising academic achievement right now. Certainly, if we find spaces of that, we need to honor them and figure out what we did and double down on that positive deviance. But we didn't have mindful planning to prepare for this. We didn't have, systems in place that were piloted and structured so that we knew. Now we have that opportunity to just step back, take a breath, and we've opened up new possibilities we never thought were open before, but not just running to them in the way that water finds the least resistant path, but moving towards it with an intentionality of raising the tide. So, Dr. Brooks, did you want to get in? What kind of metrics would you say we should be looking for in November?
So, I think, for me, I'm sorry, this dog is barking in the background. So
I love dogs. Bark on, bark on.
Yeah, it's not my dog, it's my neighbor's dog, but my door's open. But I think one of the things that, I'm looking at sort of an ecological model here, right? So at every level, we should be having metrics around this. And so, Commissioner McFadden, I really appreciate you sort of naming the student engagement as a key part of that. I think when we look at the level of the schools, right? So I think I need to understand how teachers are, I would say, experiencing and working with the technology. I want to know their satisfaction, what that really looks like. I want to understand sort of at that school level what have been the fruits of our labor in terms of actually like cleaning and keeping things tidy, and sort of down to that sort of granular level there. I'd say from at the district level, I would want to see information, 80% of staff, 80, 90% of staff and the central office feel like they have the mental support resources necessary to feel like they can effectively do their jobs. I'd love to see a particular number of sort of, broken down literally by ILEDs. I would want to know that their principals feel at a high degree equipped, prepared, whatever that number is, 85, 90%, whatever that looks like, that they know what they're doing and they have the supports. And so I think for every part of this, our institution, there's a metrics of around not only satisfaction, but also feeling equipped in terms of incompetent to do their job. And so, that's how I'm thinking about sort of, what we might be looking at. In addition to, of course, student need in terms of how they're faring, just how you making it do this.
Outcomes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would even add to that, I think, Commissioner Brooks, in the employee effectiveness sort of realm, to dig deeper to how invested in the solution were you at every level. I've heard from some content area teachers are overwhelmed and they're doing all this work, and other content area teachers are like, I'm just kind of, hanging out waiting to see what happens. Or, we know that like the paraprofessionals in our schools are there because of an invested love in young people. The school resource officers, well, now that they're not involved in interaction with students on a daily basis, the people I'm hearing from want to be invested in the solution. So how are we not just leaning into North Avenue and ILEDs, but how are we really empowering every local line level to be a part of the solution and to sort of, disperse some of the labor, because this is a whole huge lift of work. And if only a few are taking on that lift, we are missing out on resources, as well as opportunities to really build an investedness in the blueprint for Baltimore's future moving forward in education. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please finish your thought.
No, that was finished. I was going to move on to the next one because it felt like a pregnant pause, but.
Dr. Brooks, you're unmuted. Were you going to chime in?
Yeah, so I think to your point, Commissioner Hassan, is this piece around sort of how do we begin to sort of add capacity. And I think this is a great opportunity to retool the folks that who have always played a vital role, I think, in supporting the development and the success of a school, in any ways that actually prepares them to take on more responsibility. And whether that's helping, paras doing, working more in collaboration with their teachers to do some of the development, maybe that is a training process, or however that begins to look. I think about sort of as we begin to shift labor and shift role, that it would become really important to figure out how do we prepare the next wave of folks to sort of be a safety net, and so that some folks aren't burning out. Because one of the things that I am fearful of is that given this crisis, that we're going to have teachers who may burn out. We will have professionals who may burn out because the folks who are going through a lot, and then we'll have folks who won't be able to get the types of supports they need, and therefore they're around but burnt out. And we know burnt out folks are just less effective. That's just kind of like what we know. And so I really think about like how do we, what does a teacher's sabbatical look like? What is that 6 weeks or that month off or something? I really think we need to be thinking really creatively about how we help people recharge in this moment.
Yeah, I think especially if we go back with a remote platform, in that very, very few people go into education because they like their solitude. Most of us went in because we feed off engagement with other people. And so this is a very non-soul feeding thing to a lot of people. And Zooming is exhausting.
Dr. James, if I may.
You may.
I think this also, Dr. Brooks, I appreciate your dialogue. I think that a major factor in the work that we're doing is um, communication, right? Because there are a lot of things, Dr. Wu and Allison, that you all were mentioning that we were doing. But there are a lot of people, even people that are working for the system, there are some gaps in communication. And it's an ongoing struggle with a large organization, like the one that we serve. But I think that's important. It's, and thinking about what Dr. Brooks is saying, the professional learning opportunities, which is why I'm happy that in teaching and learning, we had that presentation from family community engagement about their strategy, how they're working with partners, how they're doing their best to communicate um, what's happening. But we really have to streamline that so that everyone is on the same page, everyone knows about the resources that are available to them through the work that everyone is doing. I received a call maybe an hour and a half ago from a retired educator from city schools that has a group at a local church within my neighborhood. And she was asking about the digital divide, as we call it, right? How can they help? How can Heritage Church help in assisting the school system with making sure that the school has students have access to internet and things like that? There are a lot of things that are already in place that I don't think um, is clearly communicated to the community. It's just an ongoing thing that we have to improve on and get better with, because there are a lot of questions that people have. If I can, Dr. James Hassan, you sent earlier a list of potential um, policies that may be impacted um, by COVID. I just want us to think, and I appreciate that because it's extremely helpful. And I know that Allison was working on that too. To your point, Dr. James, you mentioned, we are in crisis, mode now, not necessarily remote learning. And so, in looking at our policies that Dr. Wu included in that last slide, it was one of the questions. I think that we should look at amending or editing potentially policies in the event of crisis and not necessarily, COVID, this where we are right now. What will happen in the event that we do have to go remote as a result of something?
Mm-hmm.
Or how will our policies be impacted by another crisis, maybe another plague or some sort of natural disaster, God forbid. But I think about that. I think about certification, and I know that that's an issue throughout the state. I think about how our policies speak to that. I think about hiring. What does hiring look like? And if there are policies that address that, and do we need to look at that differently in the event of a crisis? I think about, as we move forward, also transportation. What will transportation look like in a system of choice where most of our high school students are traveling distances generally to get to their high schools? What does transportation now look like in maintaining and ensuring the safety of our young people and the folks that are working? I think that's important. Um, and then I know this is something that we're going to think about, in the coming weeks, Dr. James. But procurement, what do our procurement policies look like, um, edited in an amended version to deal with a crisis? What are our priorities with spending? What does that look like as we're thinking about managing a crisis while we're still doing what we've been entrusted to do, and
Mm-hmm.
that make sure that the academic achievement of our young people is a priority, and their well-being also. I think that they go hand in hand. So
Yeah, no, there's a bunch. I pulled out, I think I
remote
pulled.
working policy. I know that Dr. James mentioned that also. But do we need to? And I'm sure you can speak to this a little bit more, Dr. James. But what could some amendments look like for that policy? Seeing as though we are in an extended period of time where we're in a crisis. We've been away from our school buildings for 2 months. So what can we learn from this to kind of edit our remote, work policy? Could be beneficial. That's it, because I'm really going to stop talking because
No.
Dr. Wu, no, it's coming before teaching and learning also, correct? So it'd be another opportunity to chime in. So I'm pushing pause.
Okay.
So from a different vantage point.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And within those policies, I think the conversation that's germane to this particular group is, do we want to, A, do we want to, and B, is there capacity to go through and tweak or add regulations to the individual policies? Or do we want to go back to where we were a few weeks ago with saying we need sort of an overlying policy that says we're in unique times. Think there are things that we require extreme flexibility. Or a third option is do we need to make a new policy that says, we already have a policy on procurement in the state of an emergency. Do we need an overarching management policy for this is what needs to happen? So normally we have, our board governance structure of the board chair and vice chair meet with the superintendent. We have our committee structure. Do we need a state of emergency structure where we assemble a task force and they are the guiding drivers? I don't know what that answer looks like, but I think they're the important questions to be asking from a governance policy lens at this point. And if I could throw in a plug for teaching and learning, when you have this conversation there, I would love for us to think about how we're going to re-entry in the fall to protect kids as much as possible, considering things like looping. So they would have the same teacher they had last year for next year, so it's one less change. Which
Dr.
also
James, protecting students, but also protecting staff, teachers. I'm just thinking about the amount of training that is going to need to happen before that process even begins. Whatever phase we move forward with, I just think that, to Dr. Brooks's point, the way that we are moving forward with professional learning has to be adaptive and responsive, not just to where we are, but to the feedback that we're receiving from the people that are actually doing the work. I can give you feedback based on my perspective in Baltimore County. I can give you feedback from my, listening and my conversation with teachers and principals throughout city schools on a daily basis. But it is completely different than actually taking that feedback from the people that are doing the work that we're all talking about right now. I think that's important to take into consideration, just to piggyback on what you said with that reentry plan.
Absolutely. And the fact that we're in contract negotiations at this point, and what are the impacts of this experience on negotiating a contract that allows us to be nimble enough to deal with coming forward, and also understanding, the health and wellness ramifications of workplace safety, and the wellness policy, the staff wellness policy aspects, that are leading to some comorbidity issues that are making people more at risk. And so really this is giant, but we have an opportunity. Without the volcano, we wouldn't have Hawaii, right? So we have an opportunity right now in this volcano to really build a beautiful island. If we're willing to take the risk, to make the choices, to draw the hard lines of listening to the students and the faculty and the administrators on what they need, and then, as Dr. Wu said, looking at the national, international, and local research and data for what we can imagine to be better and different, and what needs to be the same because it was awesome.
And I love, Dr. James, how you mentioned the difference between COVID and crisis, right? And how we move forward with just crisis management, and how we take that into consideration with all of our policies, the way that we operate, and how students are still engaging throughout this entire process.
So Jenny, I'm happy to share with you, Alison. I shared with the committee the 31 policies that I think will be most directly, I don't want to say impacted by this experience, but had the what popped off the page as the most sort of low-hanging fruit of we better consider this or might want to consider this.
And if I could interject at this point,
You certainly may. Welcome.
Hi, Allison shared that list with me, and it dovetails with work that we're doing in the Office of Legal Counsel to review all policies and regulations to identify where there are potential issues that we need to flag and review one by one, just so we have our work aligned with that list and a more comprehensive review that we then can bring back to the committee and share.
Yeah, because I mean, there's the very, very transactional pieces like transportation. But then there's the more transformational, like our community schools policy, or within our wellness policy, it says students will have access to mental health services. In a remote learning scenario, how are we making sure, or do we have the capacity to make sure the kids have access to mental health services? Or are we saying, you know what, that's going to be, the city health commissioner's responsibility when we're not in school? So they're big questions beyond the scope of a 60 to 90 minute, public Zoom meeting. But I think it's important that the community knows that we are thinking about these things and we are invested in them and making sure that we're doing the best we can. Jenny, are there other things you prefer from us?
Commissioner Hassan.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Dr. I'm sorry.
Could you send that to me, because for some reason I can't find it, the list of policies?
Sure, I thought I sent it to the committee, but I will resend it as soon as.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Not facilitating meeting.
Yay.
No, I didn't, Commissioner, I didn't have anything else in particular. I think the policy question that you're raising and the work that you did to pull that together, as well as what the legal team is looking at, is a big part of what I think this committee could really help us with in terms of thinking about, as you framed it, how we think about this work in a time of, crisis, whether it's this current one or some different one, God forbid, in the future. So I think that is something this committee could really address to support us in this work.
Yeah, and I think that it also makes sense to lean into really, as a board, how are we going to measure success? One thing that was not mentioned was academic achievement on test scores, was not AP test, rankings in the quick little conversation between three of us as metrics of success. But obviously that's how the general public measures us. So how do we figure out what are the metrics underneath that to give us more formative milestones of, are we on track? How many students have we not kept track of? Or how many students have not checked in? Looking at the attendance policy, and if we are remote, if I'm a single parent, and I know this from having been a single parent, when I had to work and my son was on a not in school time, whether it was a summer school session or he would go with grandma or an aunt or something to stay. So if a student in Baltimore City is living in Virginia with their grandparents, how do we ensure they have access to extracurriculars or engagement, or what does attendance capture zones look like and some of these policy pieces for remote learning? If it's distance learning and my capture zone is someplace else, can I remote learn and go to a different school? What's available seats if it's not about a physical structure? So some of those pieces I think are going to be really important, and again need longer talk through than you can do in a virtual meeting. But again, want the public to know that these are things we're thinking about and trying to figure out. And we have super, super brilliant staff, such as yourself, who are very capable and will lean in and make it happen. That is our only agenda item today. So I want to open it back up. Drell and Ronald, if you have other thoughts, ideas, comments before I check in with Mr. Gant and see if there's any public comment, folks. No? We good?
I didn't ask, Allison, how are you doing today? I know that you and Dr. Wu, yes, you're busy, but I know Allison is carrying a lot of weight. Not that we all aren't, but I don't remember just stopping to just check in.
I appreciate that, but I will say that I do not. I mean, the team is everybody is carrying so much weight that I do not feel at all disproportionately. I mean, that I'm carrying any weight. And John Davis has so much that he's carrying. Jenny is taking on tons with the scenario planning. I mean, what I really feel so fortunate about is that we have a team of folks. Jeremy thinking through all the staffing pieces, Lynette talking about the operations pieces. I mean, and Tina's done tons on the internet access and the partnerships, and Sarah Heaton on the technology and the IT department. So I can't tell you how fortunate it feels to have a team full of people who are all doing taking on the different pieces that have allowed us to achieve what we've achieved. And Josh has been such a great addition to the team, thinking proactively about things like the procurement, the contracting that we've done, and how do we get better about actually making sure the contracts that we have in place now reflect the new work, that we're in a very different place. So I really just feel incredibly fortunate to have such a strong team around us to help lift all the different pieces, because it is so much bigger, as you've all been saying, then it's hard to comprehend at times how all the different pieces of it, because there's so much that's unknown. The scenario planning of, all the different ways that we could have to try to address this, all of which have problems, all of which have real challenges that we have to try to think through. It does feel overwhelming at times. So it is helpful to have a whole group of people to share thoughts with and to bounce ideas off of. So I mostly feel really fortunate about the team that we have in place to be able to do this, because you couldn't do it if there was any one or two people disproportionately taking on burden.
That's good to know, and I think that it was a really brilliant thing for the district to do in making sure that Dr. Wu's her job and her capacity now being the ED for is it executive strategy and operation? Is that I think it's ideal. It's perfect for right now, and I don't think that we were anticipating something like this to happen in the moment that the role kind of changed for you. But I just think that, yes, we do have all of the right folks. I think we have a good team. I just think that we have to continue to collaborate. So I just want to just mention to you all that I appreciate the opportunity that you all are affording in each board committee to actually do this before we hear about the robust, recovery plan as we move forward. So thanks.
Yeah, and I will just say that this is going to be a conversation, because there's going to be a lot of iterations to go on this. We're at the beginning of a very long process that's going to continue to change as we go, and so we will need to have opportunities to come back and keep hearing all the great feedback that we always hear from you about things we should be thinking of differently or things we hadn't thought of, because it is a long process. This is not a short-term fix. This is a long-term process, both in terms of how do we think about schooling in the fall, and then also when this particular situation passes, how does that impact what we do differently going forward? And those are all complicated conversations that are going to be made much better by having all of your input.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your feedback and your thinking and your questions. I think they'll definitely inform the way that we're thinking about the planning. I just think it's so important to make sure that we have included different perspectives as we do this work. And so making sure that we get your thinking and your thoughts on this is incredibly important in this process. So I just wanted to thank you so much for engaging in this conversation today.
I just got rid of a cat, sorry. I have two questions. One is, if we look at this last sort of 3 months as a mad dash Twitter chat, right? We've been employing technology people are somewhat familiar with, not familiar with, really familiar with bombarding with questions and content. Is there any thought of looking at the summer as more of a slow chat? Like doing here's the 4th grade question of the week or topic of the week, an idea of the week kind of thing, to extend learning now that parents are invested differently, or homes are invested maybe differently in schooling than they were. Families have had more direct interaction with content than they maybe had before. So nothing necessarily required, but are we looking at how we can use the platforms we've experienced and exposed to, because there's no real ceremonial end of year, which is heartbreaking for some folks. But why, how are we going to continue, even if you're not officially registered for a summer program? Conversations around that. And then I'll follow up with another question if there's any input on that, if we've thought about that at all, about what summer look like for continuing traditional learning.
And we have talked about summer, and we've talked about, part of the challenge with summer is to your point, is like there's so much to think about for the fall that we also want to make sure that we're preserving time to really think about planning for the fall. So I think right now, the thought is kind of focusing on some of the key things that really have to get done, like credit recovery. Is an area where we really want to make sure there's an opportunity for students to to make up any credits that they need to get in order to continue their path towards graduation or to graduate. But I think we are thinking that this is a time to really think about the longer term strategy in terms of professional learning for teachers. We still have a lot to do with regard to recruitment, so making sure that we're recruiting the right people to be in the right places. All this scenario planning, we are doing some really quick work right now, but then, we're going to continue to learn more as we have throughout this situation. Each week is different. You have more information than you did the week prior, and the situation has changed slightly. So we're going to have to continue to adapt and those scenarios as we move towards the fall and really try to figure out what that looks like. So I think preserving space, what it looks like in terms of when we do get to a situation when we can add academic time, if we can do that, if we have more capacity to do recovery or acceleration. I think one thing that makes me nervous when we talk about recovery is, to me anyway, recovery sounds a lot like remediation, which is not what we're talking about. We're really talking about how do we accelerate students when we get them back into an environment where we can really get back on track to the new normal, as Jenny phrased it. How do we do acceleration during all this? And so all that is a new way of thinking, and that's going to really take some time. So I think the committees that we formed are kind of topic specific committees, and maybe there's some way that we think about how to check in on those committees at some point throughout this process with board members. But I think that's the conversation that we're going to have. And I think part of our challenge that we've had already is that I think the benefit of having a team of people who really can lead work really successfully is that's a great thing. And it also means that, how do we keep, and Jenny's put a lot of thought into this, how do you keep making sure that you're also like cross-fertilizing, that the information is crossing the different departments who are doing the work, and that you're informing each other, and people aren't moving so quickly that we're not thinking about how do we loop it all back in together. And so, like I said, Jenny and our support from Accenture, they're putting some thought into that, but that is one thing that I think we're going to have to keep working on during the summer, because that has been a little bit of a challenge. I feel like not a day goes by where somebody doesn't say to me, "Oh, I didn't know we were doing X," and not through bad intentions, not through lack of communication. We have a daily COVID call every single day, but the volume of the information that's coming out, and you talked earlier, Commissioner McFadden, about communications, and it's not for lack of communicating. There's so much information going out that I almost feel like it's somewhat communication overload. There's just so much information out there, and it's hard for all of us to follow it, let alone if you're a parent trying to teach your child at home and keep up with what we're doing. So it is hard. So we have to keep thinking about how do we not only make sure that we all have the information we need, but that we have the time and space to use that information to better inform decision making.
I appreciate that, Allison, and I also want to just highlight the city schools website. Right, the website is it's a hell of a resource, and I've been sending that, like the homepage. It's great, but then we have to also consider, and the communication piece is where my brain is. But I appreciate you raising it. Just the folks that don't have the same type of internet access, the bandwidth to actually do that. I know that there have been a lot of, and I'm talking about community and parents. I know you were mentioning that too, but I think about calls also. I know that some of the senators and the folks, they're doing more of the conference calls versus a lot of the things online, because a lot of people have better access. I won't say more, but just better access to a phone, whether it is a landline or whether it is just minutes to talk, that they're able to communicate that way. So you're right. It is communication and information overload, but finding a way to streamline information in an easy way, to just reference folks to that one location. And it might be a myriad of information there, but at least there's comfort in knowing that this is the place where I can go to access it.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And yeah, I mean, so John does these daily emails like to principals. John Davis does this, that are full of information, and they're very positive, and they have a lot of the messaging that Jenny was talking about, that Commissioner Brooks was asking about how do you make sure that staff are, that principals are taking the time to take care of their staff and so on. They are a great positive. We've heard really positive feedback about them for good reason, but they also have so much information in them that it's like, how do you make sure that people have the time to digest all that? It's so much. And what happens each day is so different than the situation you knew the day prior. And I just feel like that's going to keep happening for a while.
Darrell, your mic's off. It's still off. We can't hear you, my dear.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay, great. I keep hitting it, but my fingers are too cold to get the screen to actually activate. So I need to maybe shut my door. But I think one of the things, and as we think about sort of the summer learning, and I definitely hear you, Allison, around make sure that we're reserving enough bandwidth to think about the fall. I would also add that we need time to think about nuance. And so we received a notification that some of our trans and gender non-binary students, because of the way that it was set up and put into Google Docs and Google Classrooms, they were being misgendered, right? And so while all of this big stuff is happening, there still has to be a way that somebody's keeping contact or an eye on some of that nuance. And so I'm hoping that as we slow down just a smidge, that we can add in layers of folks for time to actually think through the nuances of what does it mean to really go virtual. Because for me, that's really important, and it impacts someone's ability to do learning, what kind of learning, especially if you're misgendering them in a virtual learning environment. And so again, I think it's not a function of malice, it's a function of, I think there's just so much going on and so much brain power and capacity being used up. Some of the nuances could be bolstered, and I think we'll need some time for that as we think about processes moving forward.
No, I think that's right. And so, I'm sorry, Josh. I was just gonna say that so much of what we're trying to do is about making sure that students feel seen and heard and connected with, and misgendering somebody is a good way to make sure somebody feels that they're not being, that their whole self is not being recognized and incorporated into the classroom, engaged effectively.
And just to follow up on that, we're clarifying to schools exactly how the student information system can be updated to guard against that, and also putting into place additional guidance on making sure that it is very straightforward in ways that schools can support students who are changing name or gender consistent with all guidance at the state and federal level.
Now you're on mute.
I just did that to make Darrell feel better about himself.
Very inclusive. Very inclusive.
My inclusiveness one. No, thank you for that. So my last question is on the area of partnerships. And in digging through the policies, we have a community schools policy, we have procurement policies, but I don't see a lot of policies around partnerships and engagement. So looking at, we've had a lot of people step up to the plate in this experience and really lean in with us. In the last 4 years, we've had a lot of people step up to the plate in organizations. But how are we looking at partnerships in supporting moving us forward? And then how are we looking at some sort of an event, a way to honor some of these partnerships of folks who have have either retooled their organizations to make PPE or stepped up and helped with food service, to make sure that there's a recognition of this is really a village, and how the village has stepped in. So I'll just throw it out, partnerships, and see what either of you have to offer, if anything. It's not a have to answer. It's just.
Yeah, no, so partnerships have been so critical to what we've been able to do. And I just can't say enough about how much the community in all different forms has come in to try to help us get better at what we're doing and provide services that we couldn't otherwise. So whether it's helping deliver meals to families, whether it's, working at the meal sites, whether it's, like you said, helping connect with people who can make masks, or donating masks, or
Even I think like the curriculum companies, like, I don't know if we ever capitalized on it, but I know that there were several companies that were offering their online platform for free. Just take it, use it, go talk later about next steps. I want to make sure the board is able to be both judicious in understanding any ethical, if company A gave us a curriculum for the semester, we tried it, and then we go buy it, what's that look like? How do we acknowledge that they gave it to us for this long if we don't buy it and buy from another company? There's just some ethics pieces, budget pieces, and accountability pieces around that, as well as really acknowledging and championing, even if we don't use any equipment that are moving on, that the people went above and beyond to help support kids.
Yeah, and we've been trying to work with, like internet providers to make sure that we have access to our students. And so how do you do that in a way where you're not necessarily promoting an internet provider to the community, but that yet you are making the resource available to families to help increase access. So, and Tina's been leading a lot of that work and doing a really good job at helping push to get as much as we can for our students without, without compromising, or putting us in a situation where we're pushing one company versus the other. So that is work that has been really important to where we are. Also philanthropic or company contributions. I mean, we've raised $1 million now in the fund portion that's for that's the city schools portion for supporting food and technology. And then there's additional contribution that was just for food. So we've had so many partners come up to really to help us do this work, and it's vital because it does require all kinds of support from different parts of the community that you didn't know you were going to need. But we're trying to make sure we're engaging community organizations. I mean, I'll give a shout out to Kim Trueheart, who, she really reached out because she wanted to, she has her food community center, and I swear it's almost every day, including weekends, that Kim texts me a picture of the food that she's serving at that meal site that day. And it's just incredible. It's like, beautiful homemade meals or produce that she got from a farmer. We linked her into the World Central Kitchen. So she's one of the sites now that World Central Kitchen delivers meals at. So it's like you can exponentially impact the communities when you partner with folks who together you're bringing in different resources. I mean, I will say in her case, she's bringing in the vast majority of those resources. It's incredible. But that is really the way to keep moving this, is that we've got to bring together all kinds of different folks to help reach out to students and to connect with students to make sure that they're engaging in the curriculum and the lessons and supporting students and so on.
So that those are my big ones. Team, any other thoughts?
Dr. James, what guidance is MABE providing to local boards right now?
So MABE
as far as policy guidance or suggestions or recommendations for local boards, is any of that, can you talk about it if you can?
Yeah, so MABE believes very strongly in local leadership and local governance. So not prescribing anything, but certainly having conversations around some big ideas around budgeting, mostly in response to the governor's veto of Kerwin, and how we move forward with that is where the conversations lie today. as opposed to digging into a reentry plan. They've offered some professional development in best practices for online communication, for social emotional learning, for as far around trust and things like that for board members. But our next agenda item is to, between now and June, really dig into reentry and guidance for reentry, up to and including some conversations. We have a webinar tomorrow with the CDC to talk about summer programming and summer camps, and what that looks like from a health and safety standpoint. And in case you didn't know, we are in Baltimore City going ahead with summer school programs. So the program that I interface with, we're planning on having our 2,200 students and figuring out how to make it work over the summer. But MABE has been, to this point, really leaning into the transactional of how to support getting to the end of the school year with grades, graduation ceremonies, things like that, and are now going to pivot to the reentry plans. So I'll be happy to share when we get 3 to 4 weeks more down the road. But this is literally, while we are all in different boats, we are definitely in the same river, and we are all fixing the airplane as we fly it, and all of those other mixed metaphors we can do that create this locomotor challenge we're dealing with right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the other areas I was curious about is particularly around the collaboration and partnership piece. I'm still not sure how that works, Allison. So if someone is wanting to partner with city schools, what does that look like? How do they do that? Is there a link on a website? And particularly, is there a policy implication for us in terms of how we manage partnerships strategically across the district that we might need to consider? And I'm not sure if you had already captured that, Martha. I'm Commissioner Hassan.
No, Martha works.
Yes, I just wasn't sure because I know that I'm just not sure actually about how that process even materializes. And so how do we make one choice over another if some folks are offering similar things, that type of situation?
So there's partnerships at the school. There's lots of partnerships that we have at the school level. So a lot of the times that's done through the principal or through the community schools coordinator. A lot of the training that we do for community schools coordinators is about creating and maintaining partnerships. So a lot of times, so it kind of depends on the partnership, what you're talking about, but sometimes it might be a school level partnership. Sometimes it is a district level partnership, and it can be if it's a local organization, then we connect them through Tina's office with Monique Sims on her staff as the person who really oversees the partnerships for local entities and works with them to think about what that could look like and flesh out the terms of the agreement, of what the partnership is going to entail. For our more national level partnerships, like Heart of America is one of our national partnerships. We usually do those out of my office. And so then we work with them on, making sure they try to align their work to what our priorities are. So in the Heart of America world, they have been really good partners in trying to think through what are our needs in terms of facility needs. And so then they align their work to support our needs. Or Kaboom is another one like that, where they try to build playgrounds based on what we're telling them we need in terms of playground priorities. So it's always trying to kind of fit it into to meet with the needs of the district and trying to facilitate the expertise of the partner in a way that leverages, provides support to us, but also trying to also walk the line so it doesn't take us off mission and take us into an area that is a distraction from something else we're working on. So. And I think one thing we've tried to do over the last few years is really get more strategic about that, because I think it was a little bit more catch as catch can before, and we really have tried to align partners to really try to support our key strategies. And so that was partly the blueprint was one key way we did that, to telegraph that these are some of the key things we're working on. And then we really have worked with many of the key partners who were working with us before, and the Heart of America is a good example where they did work with us prior, but they did like a project here and there kind of when like periodically. And now we have a much more aligned, like we meet with them regularly. They try to do projects that meet our needs, or Under Armour is a good example of a partner too, where we have a sports advisory committee where there are students who advise, who are advisors to that committee. And then we meet regularly to talk about like what should we be trying to achieve for student athletes across the district? And so how does it align with our blueprint strategy with regard to wholeness and with regard to leadership?
You're on mute again, Darrell.
Great. So, and is there a place online on the website where that's kind of like laid out so that we can just direct people who are interested in doing supports, both local and national, work to get in contact with folks?
I don't know that there's a place on the website. Let me get back to you with that. If there's a key place on the website where people, I mean, probably the engagement part of the website, but I don't know if there's a partnership piece.
Allison, do you know, this is sort of a pivot, so Darrell, if it takes us off target for where you want, we can come right back. Do you know if we've done any work to reach out to say the diocese just announced a number of school closings in the state? Are we reaching out and sending letters of invitation to the students that are in those schools to join us in city schools?
We have not done that. It's a good idea. We have not reached out to I don't know that we have lists of those students. We could send lists to students who live in that general geographic area, I suppose, if we had addresses. But no, we have not done that.
I was thinking of that as I was sort of coming with my culminating comments for today. And I was like, okay, I'm going to ask us all to think about how do we as a board want to measure success? And do we want to measure success just by, phew, we stayed out of the news and phew, we survived? Or do we want to measure success by, maintaining enrollment numbers, which then brought me to how are we going to actually maybe leverage this to increase enrollment numbers? And we've got parents and families who may be reconsidering what they thought was going to be an assumptive private school experience for their kids, or parents who have now tried on homeschooling and are like, yeah, maybe I'm going to do that. How do we convince them, do we offer a hybrid model? We develop a program of, you want to homeschool your kids, well, they still need to come together for socializing and some specific experiences, and how can the school system be a hybrid partner with parents?
No, it's just something that we talk about a lot, is like, how do we really make sure we're providing quality, enriching, connected options for students? Because you're right that this is, to your analogy of the Hawaii before, I mean, this is just such a drastic change of everybody's life that everybody is, I'm sure, rethinking every aspect of how they engage with their work, how they engage with school, how they engage with their personal life. And so this is a time when people might be thinking creatively about different ways they could structure their home life or their child's academic life. And so we do need to be making sure that we're providing a quality option and really thinking creatively about ways in which students could engage. And we have seen some data about students who have been engaged in ways that this in a more distance learning way that maybe weren't engaging in a traditional realm, who clearly we weren't providing them the kind of option that worked for them before. So sometimes that might be an older student who's balancing different options. They're trying to balance a work life or family responsibilities with the school life. And so this is a great time to really think through, how do we make that much more regular and intentional part of option for students to be able to balance the various things that are going on in their lives, and make this a more meaningful opportunity to do a college or AP courses and really provide high quality learning opportunities for students who have other things going on at the same time.
And hi, all, just to interject really quick, if you go to baltimorecityschools.org/partners, it's a website that's dedicated to how local organizations and schools can connect. So there's a section on how to formalize a partnership and how to begin that process. So once again, it's at baltimorecityschools.org/partners for all that information.
Thank you, Joe. You're so great.
And if you don't remember the exact /, if you just go to the main website and put in the search box just partners, it'll take you to that page.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Great. And is that for national partners as well, or just local?
I think we prioritize local partners, but I don't see why we couldn't have national partners as well.
More
Well,
national
Doc-
partners we
Doc-
often work
Doc-
through my office, but they certainly could apply that way. But they often come to us a different way. But they could apply that way for sure.
All right. Anything else before we go? Mr. Gant, are there any public comment folks today?
We didn't have any public comment sign-ups, no.
Okay. So I will throw it back out to the committee. Commissioner McFadden, any thoughts, questions, final words?
I think that our discussion today was quite substantive. I just wish everyone safety. I'm just praying for everyone to stay safe, to find some time to take for yourselves as you balance work and life. I think that's important now more than ever.
And I'll throw out a little shameless endorsement. If you are a teacher and looking for a soul-feeding Friday afternoon, Commissioner McFadden is hosting. Are you going to continue to host?
Yeah, it's in response to the folks that have been participating. So I've been hosting this conversation with educators and teachers called Real Talk every Friday afternoon. And I've been working with our two past teachers of the year, both Laquisha Hall and Kia Butts. We've kind of been co-facilitating this conversation, and it's really a support group for teachers to kind of just share their best practices, discuss wellness. We've had some folks come in to deal with the social emotional wellness aspect of our lives. We do yoga. We do yoga every week virtually. We have some guests come in that are experts in areas that we need some support in as teachers now more than ever. So yeah, it's on Zoom. Just follow the social media, all of that, and you'll get the information that way. Or just send me a message, email. It all works.
It feels very much a little bit like a family reunion of let's take a pause, breathe together in this collective experience. So thank you for that gift to the community.
Necessary. Absolutely.
That's
Dr.
great.
Brooks, any final thoughts from you?
No, just wanted to say thanks. Conversation was useful, and I'm looking forward to our continued discussions.
Awesome. All right, and I will go ahead and I will forward you that list of policies. Allison, Jenny, thank you very much. Joe, Josh, people who've been in the background, appreciate you. Christian, so I hope everyone is well. Our next policy committee meeting, I'm going to say this really slow so that Christian can come on and tell us when it is, because I forgot to look.
June 16th.
June 16th at 3:30, same station, same time. So with that, at 4:58 p.m., we are officially adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.